Well, hello again sports fans. This is the latest comparative test between my RSSI ProTrack and Quantum Overlord video receivers. This will be what for me is a long range test. The plan is to head out to the south of my location around about 7 kilometres, turn around and come back. If you've watched my earlier videos, you'll know that I've modified part of the array of the Overlord so that I have a much shallower angle on 3 of the antennas. I'll be aiming this modified section of the antenna towards my intended line of flight as near as I can, and won't be altering it for the duration of the test. The same with the ProTrack. Once I've confirmed that it's locked onto the model, I'll just be following my course and leaving the ProTrack to its own devices. As has been the case for the previous flights, I'll be using my blunt nose version of the Teximo, which has a flight time between 15 and 20 minutes and a range of probably 20 to 25k. The wind is blowing at about 10 to 15 kilometres an hour from the north, which is the direction I'm launching in, and I'll be flying primarily to the south, so I'll have the wind behind me on the way out but be fighting against it on the way back. So this is the view from the Mobius action camera on the nose of the Teximo, and the Teximo's in return to home mode while I walk back to the base station and check that the video recorders are working. As you can see, the ProTrack is happily following the model around the sky. The DVRs appear to be recording, and I can switch between the feeds from the 2 antennas and view them on the monitor, so it looks like Thunderbirds are go. I take it out of return to home and start flying it south. At this point I'm just under a kilometre away from home, and I've overlaid the video feed coming from the 2 antennas. As you can see, I'm at about 200 metres altitude, and I'll be climbing up to probably between 400 and 500 before the trip's finished. Just coming up on the 2 kilometres and everything's hunky-dory, both video feeds are good. If you've seen my earlier tests, you'll know that both antennas perform pretty well out to at least 4 kilometres, so I'm not expecting to see any trouble until around about then. So we're just coming up on the 4 kilometre mark now. I suppose I should explain the OSD. So we've got current, speed, altitude and distance from home. And in the middle of the screen we've got a handy little sort of pseudo radar thing that shows me where the plane is in relation to home, the direction home, and what the direction the plane's flying is. It's quite handy. So the video from both antennas is still pretty good, though I'd have to say the Overlord seems to be a little bit grainier than the ProTrack at this stage of the game. At this point I lose the signal from the ProTrack and the array goes into its circular searching mode, and it does one complete rotation before it manages to lock back onto the signal. So we're past 5 kilometres now, and the Overlord starts to get a little bit grainy and starts dropping out, and I suspect it's because I'm flying too far to the west towards the mountain side of the valley. So I move out to the east a little and things improve for the Overlord. But the ProTrack loses the signal again and goes into rotation, and it does 2 or 3 rotations this time before it comes back. Meanwhile I fly back further towards the middle of the valley. So we're just passing the 6 kilometre mark and I'm getting usable video from both. I decided to depress the elevation of the ProTrack a little bit to see if that helps, but while I'm in the process of doing that, the Teximo drifts off to the west again and I lose the Overlord picture. Navigating back to the eastern side of the valley brings the picture back, though it's still quite grainy, and the ProTrack's clearly got a better picture at this stage. So we're coming up on the 7 kilometre mark, and for some reason the Overlord picture decides it's going to start improving. But around about the same time the ProTrack loses the fix on the signal again and goes into rotation. Once again it seems to manage to recapture it just after the one rotation, so I'm not out of picture for long. The ProTrack's still pretty grainy even when it comes back, so around about the 7.5 kilometre mark I decided to flick the switch and put the Teximo into return to home mode, and we turn around and both pictures improve on the turn, but the ProTrack goes into auto rotation again once we straighten up. At this point the autopilot's still flying the plane, but the Overlord picture's certainly good enough to be able to fly by if I was in manual mode. Round about the 7 kilometres from home mark the ProTrack gets a lock and the picture's really good, and at the same time the Overlord decides it's going to get fuzzy on me. So I noticed that heading back into the wind has knocked the speed right down, so I add in some extra throttle to get it back a little bit quicker. The picture on the Overlord starts to improve, and things are looking okay for a little while. At round about the 6.5 kilometre mark the ProTrack loses the signal and once again goes into auto rotation. Coming up on the 6 kilometre mark the Overlord starts to play up again, but it's only relatively briefly and starts coming good straight away. The ProTrack's still out though. The ProTrack picture comes back quite strongly just after passing the 6 kilometre mark. The Overlord picture's a bit grainy, but it's still quite flyable and clear. So both feeds are quite useful. They're both showing the occasional patch of graininess, but I'd have to say the ProTrack's probably the clearer of the two. So we're under 5 kilometres now, and the ProTrack picture's quite clear. The Overlord picture's still flyable, but it's much grainier. And I suspect this is due to the fact that I'm on the western side of the valley. I noticed on the way up that I've aimed the Overlord over towards the eastern side, and it certainly performs better over there. But having said that, it's still quite flyable, the Overlord, but you'd have to give the clarity award to the ProTrack at this stage. So at this stage I notice that the battery voltage is starting to sag down below 10.6 volts, and in order to conserve a little bit of battery I take manual control and cut back on the throttle and sort of half glide, half power down to a much lower altitude in preparation for coming home. On the way down I navigate the Texumo more towards the eastern side of the valley and notice that the Overlord picture does lose a lot of that graininess, so there's no doubt that it's partly an alignment issue. So from this point, apart from the occasional momentary glitch, there's no real problems with either antenna on the way home. Well, once again I'm finding it hard to pick a clear winner. Both the antennas are good out to about 5 kilometres, but once past that they both got issues of one sort or another. Because there wasn't a period on this flight when both antennas were out at the same time, I was able to keep on flying and didn't need to abort, as I probably would have if I'd just been using a single antenna when it went out. I think part of the problems I'm having relate more to the terrain over which I'm flying than to the shortcomings of either of the antennas. Despite having clear line of sight to my destination, the mountain to the west has a noticeable effect on the quality of the video. I avoid most of this by flying wide on the outward leg, but in return to home mode the Texumo comes home on a more direct course which seems to pass through some sort of Fresnel zone near the mountain. So the best I can really do is just list the positives and negatives as they relate to my style of flying. So as far as the ProTrack goes, it's really simple to set up and use. It's got reliable 360-degree tracking inside 5 kilometres, and it's got a power outlet for a monitor or a DVR, so you only need to use the one battery. The time it takes the ProTrack to do a full rotation can be a real problem when you lose the signal. It makes it impossible to align the antenna manually, and while you can turn this off, it's really quite a difficult thing to achieve when you're in a panic about losing your plane. I'd be much happier if it just held its last position or scanned backwards and forwards 20 or 30 degrees. The lack of vertical tracking makes a difference for me given the variations in altitude in a relatively short distance that I fly. It would also be nice to have a power switch. I've damaged a couple of batteries by forgetting to disconnect the battery after the flight. The Overlord antenna is also relatively simple to set up and use if you just want to use it within side 5 kilometres, but if you want to go further I'd recommend the modifications that I've made. I like that it has an on-off switch, and it's also got dual power and AV outputs, so I can use it to power both my monitor and my DVR. So I still have some concerns over the gaps in the array coverage, but the modifications I've made have certainly reduced this for my application. I do need to manually realign the antenna when the signal gets weak, but I don't have to move it much, particularly after the modifications. Replacing patches with helicals may be something that I do in the future, because I think the ProTrack definitely performs better at longer range when the antennas are aligned. So I guess this has been a little like comparing apples and oranges. Both antennas are good in their own way, and the one you choose I think really is going to depend on the style of flying that you want to do. I guess if I was really serious about long range flying I'd be moving away from the 5.8 GHz towards 1.2 or something similar. But this has really been a learning exercise for me, and I hope that this series of videos might help somebody else that's as silly as me in trying to get the most out of the gear that they've got. So I shall carry on and post the occasional video when something interesting occurs.